Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and this short video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous night of the local time. Today this morning we have significant number of details, updates, and the most important are coming from Avdiivka, Mariinka, Novomikhailivka and Ivanivske direction. So let's start step by step, and first we're going to talk about Avdiivka. According to information we have, the Ukrainian military authorities of Avdiivka were given an ultimatum from the Russian side to surrender or die, and according to information we have, the Ukrainians refused to accept the ultimatum and they took a decision to continue fighting. Furthermore, according to information we have, just during the previous night, around 50 Ukrainian soldiers took a decision to surrender and basically they abandoned their positions. When talking about the situation on the ground, we have a lot of updates, as you can see. Let's start from the south. Of course, the most important update is that the former air defense base Cheburashka in Vinogradniki area, the Ukrainian defense belt that is under responsibilities very likely of 116th Mechanized Brigade, was completely encircled, and currently these soldiers are in the encirclement and in Cauldrons. These forces used to have two supply roads, two roads for evacuation. That was the first along 0505 road that were moving in direction of 9th quarter, but when the Russians launched their offensive operation, they managed to cut this line from Chernyshevskovo Street. Then the Ukrainians start using under very heavy fire the second road that they have through the three lines, also in direction of the 9th quarter. But according to information we have, as a result of Russian offensive operation, the Russians managed to establish control over this intersection of the three lines as well. This information was confirmed by different mappers, so for now the distance between one part of Russian, let's say, area control to another is less than 700 meters, around 700 meters. Let's make our own calculations for these purposes. So this is the one edge Russian positions, this is the second, and the distance is around 780 meters, more or less, plus minus few buildings through three lines and so on. And of course, anyway, this is the short gun distance from both sides. This territory is already not available for the Ukrainians for evacuation or rotation. We don't know the exact number of Ukrainians who were encircled in the former air defense base, but very likely either they will surrender or they will fight so let's see what is going to be next. The Russians, when the Russians were conducting this offensive operation to cut the last supply road, the Russians were bombing heavily in the 9th quarter. On this video we can see a few FABs arrived in the southern edge of the 9th quarter with the purpose to slow down the Ukrainians and not to allow them to redeploy the reinforcements to the south, and as you can see, that attack was very successful. Furthermore, additional updates are coming from the southern part between the Tsarskaya Okhota industrial area. We haven't been receiving any updates from this territory for a very long period of time, and today, according to different mappers, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish control over a few streets, over Kirova streets and over Lisova Street. So for now we don't know for sure the exact progress of the Russians, but according to more or less reliable resources, this is something like the progress of the Russian forces on this direction. So as you can see, the Russians continue pushing, but few things you need to understand that mainly, let's say, as we discussed during the previous days, around a lot of soldiers of Ukrainian army, let's say, surrendered. Those were like groups of 10-15 soldiers. And because of the fact that Ukrainians on the edge position surrenders, this allows the Russians to establish control over positions that were abandoned by the Ukrainians. So some progress of the Russian forces in Avdiivka is the result of offensive operation, of very bloody clashes, but some progress of the Russian forces is just the, let's say, military routine when talking about surrendering of one forces and taking their positions by another forces. So when talking about the southern part, this territory, I believe, is the area of just a process of surrendering and, let's say, giving positions from one side to another. Additional updates we start receiving from the eastern flank. The Ukrainians, according to information we have, start withdrawing their positions from the stronghold to the south of Kamyanka. Currently we don't have like 100% sure information, but the Russians are saying that they launched offensive operation in direction of the cemetery that located between the stronghold in the eastern part of Kamyanka and the central part of Avdiivka itself. This information information was confirmed by different pro-Ukrainian sources. Currently, there are very heavy clashes, and we'll see if very likely the Russians will establish control over this territory, and this can create the risk of a creation of another cauldron of the eastern flank of the eastern part of Avdiivka. If the Russians are able to answer the new cemetery, very likely they're going to cut and will be able to cut the Ukrainian forces who were stuck in the eastern part of Avdiivka. When talking about the western part of Avdiivka, we continue receiving updates about significant problems of the Ukrainian forces with the support, with supply. Today, just during the previous night, we received significant number of videos. According to the authors of these videos, all these things took place in the western part of Avdiivka. As you can see, one armored vehicle was trying to evacuate another light vehicle. The roads here is completely uncomfortable for use. The Ukrainians are no longer available to use this situation because basically they stuck in mud. And we have the same story a little bit to the north, additional video of the same story. One vehicle was trying to evacuate or move another one, and everything stuck along the supply roads. So this is the reason, one of the reasons why the Ukrainians haven't managed to conduct successful counteroffensive, why they haven't managed to conduct flank attack, and this is the reason why the Russians also from another side managed to develop significant results on every single direction. When talking about the central part, according to information we have and according to the most of the mappers, the Russians continue offensive operation to the west, and they managed to establish control not just over the industrial avenue, over the gas stations along the road, but also the Russians managed to move further and to establish control over the tree lines that located to the west, a few hundred meters further to the west in direction of the village by the name of Lastочкино. So this is like a physical control, this is like complete encirclement, and I'm not even sure what the Ukrainians are planning to do with this situation. Obviously, when the Russians finish the situation and the story with former air defense base, they will use the released forces and they will continue movements to the north. Obviously, the Russians will give a few more ultimatums for the Ukrainians probably every single day. As you can see, the current ultimatum was given to the Ukrainians unofficially. We haven't received this piece of news from, let's say, Putin or any other representative of the Russian forces or Shoigu, but very likely the closer the Russians are getting to the last supply road between Severna and 9th quarter, we're going to receive more and more updates from more official people, official persons of the Russian Federation about giving ultimatum to the Ukrainians. So this is the situation in this area. Now we are moving to Novomykhailovka direction. We got additional updates. The Russians managed during the previous 3 days establish complete control over the tree line that located in front of Pobeda itself. During the previous few days we got the first update that the Russians captured this tree line, and then we got update that the Russians were bombing Pobeda with the tanks, and now we received the final video of the final clashes on the edge positions of this tree line to the south in direction of Novomykhailovka. On this video we can see the short combat between Russian and Ukrainian soldiers, and the Russians were always bombing the Ukrainians with artillery, and under very heavy artillery fire the Ukrainian soldiers were forced to step back and withdraw their positions further to Paraskoviivka or to this stronghold. So we can say now that the Russians created the broad front line, and now they can attack Pobeda from many directions. Of course, first they need to secure the stronghold to the north along this tree line, but it's just a question of time, as I understand, and very likely and very soon Pobeda is going to fall. Additional progress was geolocated of the Russian forces to the west of Mariinka. On this video we can see FPV drone strikes of F-46 Air Mobile Brigade against the Russian forces, positions of Russian forces. This video was geolocated in this area, which confirms additional Russian progress. When talking about Novomykhailovka, we haven't received any updates about any progress, just a short video of artillery strike against Ukrainian positions, yet in the eastern part, maybe east central part of the village. Now we are moving to Bakhmut-Artyomovsk direction, where the Russians have significant progress in the vicinity of Ivanivske and in the vicinity of Chasiv Yar. We continue receiving a lot of updates about further progress of the Russian forces. During the previous night, the Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt to capture significant number of streets, territories, buildings, stronghold positions of the Ukrainian armored forces. The Ukrainians were forced to step back, abandoning their positions. The Russians captured significant number of prisoners of war, and the Ukrainians during the Russian attacks were trying to slow them down, with FPV drone strikes against their forces, armored vehicles, and they probably managed to damage some forces, but those attacks didn't stop the Russians. The Ukrainians, the core of defense of the north of Ivanivske and the east of Chasov Yar lays on the shoulders of 42nd Mechanized Brigade of Armored Forces of Ukraine, but their counterattacks didn't help the Ukrainians to hold the front line. And according to information we have, the Russians entered Ivanovska from many directions, from the southeast and from the north. And as you can see, I have adjusted the map. We still haven't received even a single geolocate confirmation of Russian progress, but we have report from very reliable resource from the ground. And this is the current situation of, let's say, edge Russian positions in this area. And there are a few important things that you need to pay attention and to note. First of all, the first Russian positions currently is located in this area, in the vicinity around this forest. This is the northern position. Additional Russian positions we can find along the water reservoir or lake that located on the western part of Marinka, and we are talking about this territory. This is the second territory that is under Russian control, where the Russians managed to dig in deeper and to establish some positions and managed to establish control over the Ukrainians and furthermore over the main supply road. So based on this photo, based on this report, the Russians managed to cut physically the main supply road N32, and now Avdiivka, Ivanovska complete any support from the mainland. Furthermore, the Russians managed to develop their foothold on the eastern flank. The Russians managed to get the streets by the name of Artyoma and the street by the name of Asvitna. In Russian language it has the different name, but anyway, this is currently the Russian progress in approximately the territory of Russian control on this direction. And furthermore, the Russians managed to improve their positions, let's say to the south, to the bottom of Schidna Street. So this is the situation. Very likely the Ukrainians still have control in the central part and along this area, but very likely with this progress and with the thing that the Russians cut the main supply road, today we're going to receive updates about the withdrawing and abandoning positions of the Ukrainians. And probably the most important update that we received from that journalist, a military journalist on the ground, is that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish control over this stronghold. So for now we don't have any updates, any confirmation from any other source, but according to him, the Russians managed to establish control over something like this. So this is additional Russian progress. We don't know the updates about these two strongholds. Very likely they are still on the Ukrainians, but very likely that this one, the biggest one that located behind these two, is under complete Russian control, and the Russians stormed this territory along this tree line and maybe somewhere else. So this is the situation in Ivanovska. We see that the Ukrainians are collapsing. The Russians are moving in two directions. First Ivanovska and the second Canal. There are the core of offensive operation in this area belongs to 98th Division and Kamerton Akhmat Special Forces. Kamerton Akhmat are storming Ivanovska from the southeast. 98th Division is storming from the north, and also 98th is moving in direction of Canal. So as you can see, the situation for the Ukrainians is getting worse and worse on Ivanovska, Bakhmut, Artyomovsk direction. We have a few more additional updates, and probably the most important, the final update we are going to discuss, is coming from Krynki. According to information we have, the Ukrainians took a decision to abandon their positions completely and to withdraw the last soldiers and the last infantry, the last forces from this territory. We start receiving updates late in the evening. According to information we have, there are no more movements, there are no more Ukrainians. The Russian sources reported about significant number of boats that were sent from Ukrainian bank of Dnieper River to this area. Significant number of empty boats entered this territory. The Ukrainians, and they were empty. So there were a lot of boats and they were empty, which means that no more fresh forces were sent here. The Ukrainians filled the empty boats with everything they could and left this territory completely. Today we are waiting for more updates, but the Russians are saying that today the Marines of 108th let's say battalion will clear the territory, and engineering forces, it will take time because there are a lot of surprises and presence from the Ukrainian side, and very likely that before the end of the weekend we're going to see complete updates about complete establishing control over this village. During the previous night, the Russians conducted massive missile strike all over the entire Ukraine. The Russians attacked Kiev, the Russians attacked Lvov, the Russians attacked Poltava, Mirgorod. And the Russians were attacking, according to the Ukrainian sources, with caliber missiles. And according to Ukrainians, they managed to shut down just half of missiles the Russians launched, just half. So this is obviously significant progress, but also we understand that if Ukrainians are saying that they managed to shut down half of missiles, very likely that they managed to shut down just probably 20%, not more. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.